Hello everyone, welcome to the episode 74 of SoLead Saturday. The guest we have today, Daniel Edds. For 25 years, he has been practicing management consulting. He is the author of two books. His most recent is titled Leveraging the Genetics of Leadership, Cracking the Code of Sustainable Team Performance. This book demonstrates how elite organizations are revolutionizing the practice of leadership, transforming the world of work, and setting new standards for employee engagement and customer value. In his consulting practice, he helps senior leaders design high impact cultures of courageous and engaged employees. Wow, looks really very interesting, and I can't wait to hear more from him. So let's just welcome him and hear more about his career journey. How did he find his area of interest and managing to lead that? Hello, Dan. Very happy to have you on the show and really appreciate all your time and consideration being on the show.
Well, thank you. It's an honor to be with you.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I'm also really very excited to hear from you. So our first section is about passion and interest.
Okay.
Under that segment, the question is, how did you find your interest in this particular field, and what motivates you every day to be in this field?
Well, that's a great question. And I'd have to say that the passion for leadership and the idea that I'm working on and that I'm expressing in this book that I wrote is very non-traditional when it comes to leadership. Mm-hmm. Most ideas about leadership looks at leadership as traits of the individual. Mm-hmm. And this book flips it. So it looks at really the kind of leadership, how high impact organizations approach the practice of leadership, and they do it very differently. But this happened to be a passion that found me. I wasn't necessarily looking for it. I've been a practicing management consultant for 25 years. And it was about 4 years ago, after actually way too many of these little small events sort of erupted into one big one. And just as an example, I was speaking with, I just finished a project for a very large state agency. This agency regulates 450,000 healthcare providers every year. Mm-hmm. And the project took several months to complete. They had probably 18 months of work to do in the implementation of the project. Mm-hmm. They were by any measure a mess organizationally. Mm-hmm. And I was speaking with the deputy director. I was finishing up my last conversation. I had my computer bag in hand. My hand was on the door. I was ready to walk out. And in a tone that was confessional, she said, I don't even tell my friends where I work anymore. I turned around and I said, why not? She said, it's just too embarrassing. And it was a number of conversations like that finally triggered my thinking about how high impact organizations approach leadership. Mm-hmm. And when I got looking at it, it was like, it captured my attention. Mm-hmm. to the point where even after 4 years, I routinely wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning and can't go back to sleep because I'm thinking about it. I routinely get up in the morning thinking to myself, how in the heck am I going to transform a body of knowledge about leadership that no longer works, and that there's research that says it no longer works? And it's one of those things where I cannot not write about it, research about it, try to work with clients and how to really exchange their organizational cultures and how they approach leadership.
Wow, that's a pretty interesting story. And I think that was very well said, right? As you mentioned that passion found me.
Yeah.
So that's a good thing, actually. Sometimes it happens reverse way as well. Always it's not like you are chasing your passion. Yep. Sometimes you find it along your career journey as well.
Right.
So thank you so much for sharing that. And moving towards our next section is about questions from the audience, where I have shortlisted a couple of questions. Actually, I had like a huge response for this one.
Great.
But I tried to just club 3 questions together. So the first question we have is, what are the indicators of the strong organizational culture and when it is unnecessary to change organizational culture?
Mhm. Well, that's a great question. And first of all, I think there's always opportunity to improve organizational culture. There's always that opportunity. But if you're going to improve the culture, you actually have to know how to do that. And you actually have to be able to measure the growth of that culture, which is the first part of your question.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say there's probably 2 or 3 indicators of a strong organizational culture.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not difficult. One is turnover. Nationally, average turnover in this country is about 25% a year.
Mm-hmm.
Healthcare, where I've done a lot of the research for the book, comes out of healthcare.
Mm-hmm.
The average hospital between 2016, I think it was, and 2020, 89% of their workforce turned over.
Mm-hmm.
That is not an indication of strong organizational cultures, because people want to work in cultures that are positive, where they have a voice, where they
Mm-hmm.
feel like they can contribute to the mission. But if the hospital is turning over their staff, it's a good indication they don't have a very strong culture. I think another one would be something like a best place to work award. So Gallup has a best place to work award. There's a number of organizations that offer, best place to work awards. And that would be another indication that, well, people like working here and it's a strong culture. Actually, one of the organizations I looked at that I profiled in the book has won the Gallup's Best Place to Work Award every year since its inception. And there's like 3 organizations out of the multitude of organizations that Gallup tracks, and they're one of 3, and they're the only one out of that's in healthcare. Mm-hmm. And the third one, I think, would be innovation. Mm-hmm. Who or what is driving innovation? Mm-hmm. If there's no internal innovation happening, in other words, all the innovation is coming from outside the organization, to me, that would be an indication this is a very weak culture, because strong cultures, they generate their innovation internally. Mm-hmm. So give you one real simple example. One of the manufacturing companies that I researched, 200 people mm-hmm. in this company. Every year, on average, not all participate, but on average, all 200 people, employees, all 200, not just the leadership, but all 200 employees generate on average 5 to 6 Kaizens, or process improvement initiatives, on their own. Mm-hmm. Every one of those is innovating a process, improving the process, looking for waste, extracting waste out of their manufacturing processes, creating more value for their customers. And I don't know too many companies that are doing that, but mm-hmm. that is remarkable. And their turnover, by the way, is single digits. Mm-hmm. And they have a waiting list of people who want to work for them. And they also have a waiting list of customers who want to do business with them.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's like completely like new to me to understand, actually. And it's good to know what goes behind, strong organizational culture. Mm-hmm. I think that when there is no necessity to change it as well.
Yeah.
So thank you so much. And moving towards our next question is, do you feel qualitative research is better than quantitative research in predicting human behavior in areas such as organizational behavior? I think you mentioned a couple of things in the earlier question.
Yeah. Well, I don't think one is more important than the other. I think they're both equally important.
Uh-huh.
In much of my consulting practice for the last 25 years, I've been a numbers guy. Trying to measure process, trying to measure revenues. It's all measurement. But yet, I always start out these projects with this idea: the number is going to get us so far. The number sort of, if we're going to go on a hike, the numbers will get us to the point where we could start the hike on a mountain trail. Where I live, we have a lot of mountains, but they don't tell us the whole story. Frequently, the whole story is part of a human story. It's part of the story of the workforce. And numbers don't tell us everything. They can direct us, but we have to have both qualitative and quantitative analysis.
Yeah, and I think both are important when it comes to the organizational culture as well.
Yep.
So thank you so much for sharing. And next segment that we have is a fun segment where I'm going to give you the 3 keywords which are moreover associated with your profile. And you have to just tell me, whatever comes to your mind. It can be like a replacement keyword, or it can be like a short definition. So whatever comes to your mind. So are you ready?
Okay. Pressure's on.
So no, you are very expert actually. From your answers, I can see that. And you have a great storytelling skill as well. So the way you are telling the answers, you have always something to give as an example.
Good. Thank you.
So, yeah. So the first word we have is culture.
Culture. So short story. 4 years ago, I was under the impression, and I still believe this to a large degree, that the way to transform an organization, the way to produce excellence, to produce elite level performance, was really around design processes and improving processes. The whole idea of continuous improvement around processes. I don't believe that anymore.
Okay.
The best way of improving an organization is through designing the culture through leadership.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree to your point.
Good.
And second keyword that we have is sustainability.
Sustainability. So most people use the word sustainability in terms of some kind of environmental sustainability. When I talk about sustainability in the research in the book and in my consulting practice, I talk about sustainability in the idea of sustaining a level of performance over time. So if you look at the whole practice of hiring and firing chief executive officers in large corporations, the average CEO of a Fortune 500 company is 3.5 to 5 years. You can't start anything and sustain it in that amount of time. You could have some, short-term bumps in ROI and short-term bumps in strategy, but long-term you can't sustain it if the average CEO is only going to stick around 3.5 to 5 years, and the data says half of them will be terminated by cause. In other words, they're going to get fired. And the other piece of that is that when they are fired or when they leave, half the COOs and CFOs are going to turn over as well. So you can't sustain any kind of long-term excellence when your executive leadership is just churning.
Wow, that's like a very interesting to know as well. Like how it goes like a hand in hand when we think about the growth, and I think it is a lot more like a togetherness, I guess, when it comes to the organization level.
Yep.
So thank you so much for sharing. And the third word that we have is employees.
Employees. Traditional way of looking at employees are units of production. We hire an employee. We want you to fulfill this particular function. Put this peg in this hole. Or, whatever you do, do it this way. It's very prescribed. But high performing organizations that can sustain, that have a history of sustaining their performance, they look at people very differently. They look at people as a resource that they can develop that resource for ever increasing value. And it's not just, I'll use this as an example, and when I tell you this story, I'm actually thinking of a real organization, healthcare organization that consistently is ranked as one of the safest hospitals in the country. Some have even speculated it might be one of the safest hospitals in the world, which may not sound like too much until you realize that accidental and avoidable deaths in hospitals is a leading cause of death in America. 161,000 people die every year in hospitals because of avoidable accidents. So safety is a big deal. This organization, actually, when I took a tour and was talking with them, it absolutely blew me away. I was totally unprepared for what I saw. They intentionally create better human beings as part of their development of their employees. And it's not, they're not satisfied with just developing better doctors and better nurses and better med techs and better, administrative assistants and reception people. They want to develop better human beings, specifically stronger, more self-confident, and more self-empowered human beings. Because they've discovered that when they do that, they create a better employee that in fact will increase ultimately value to their patients. Quick example, if I have time. If they can develop a more self-confident person, that person is more likely to speak up when they see an error, a potential error, because they're creating a culture where the safety of the patient is paramount. So they want strong, self-confident employees because they will spot something that might happen, or they will spot, hey, we can improve our safety by changing this process. So, they're tying employee development right in with their mission and how they deliver healthcare. It's a phenomenal thing when you see it.
Wow, this is really very amazing to see that there are some organizations we value the employees the most. I think employees are kind of a core part of the organization. So it's very important, as you mentioned, that betterment or the self-improvement for themselves, like employees' improvement, that is kind of a major agenda on the organization's bucket. Whenever it comes to when we talk about good organizations. So thank you so much for sharing. And the next section, we are moving towards tips and advice. So any tips or advice would you like to give to the students or the professionals who are looking to get into this area, which is a leadership, and grow into it, or looking to get into this leadership coaching kind of a area as a long-term career option for themselves?
Sure.
Support your answer with books or courses as well.
Okay. All right. Well, obviously, I might recommend my own book, but there's another book that I would highly recommend. In fact, it was actually a conversation with Dr. Barbara Kellerman at Harvard University when I was telling her what I was seeing, and she said, "Oh, there's a book you need to read." So it's called "An Everyone Culture."
Oh, wow.
Comes out of Harvard University Press. They profile 3 different organizations, and they refer to these organizations as DDOs, deliberately developmental organization. And it's all about creating better human beings. And It's a great read. It's an easy read. Reads almost like a novel. But that would be one book I would definitely recommend anybody to read who's interested in culture and development. The other thing, though, I do get asked this question every once in a while. If you're talking to emerging leaders, younger people just getting out of college, they're starting out, where do I go, et cetera. Yeah. This is what I say. Look for an organization that's going to develop you, not just develop your technical skills or, develop your ability to put a round widget in a round hole. Anybody can do that. Yeah. Look for an organization, and there are few, but they're out there, who, when you ask them, like in an interview, how are you going to develop me and my value? They can tell you exactly what they're going to do to develop me and my value. It's not just value to them, but it's value as a human being. How are you going to help me become more self-empowered, more self-confident? And if I'm being interviewed and they say something like, well, we have a very generous continuing education program, I wouldn't run, I would sprint out of there as fast as I could, because they're clueless. It's going to take a little bit of effort, but if I found a company who said, oh, this is how we're going to develop you and your value and develop you as a human being, I would take whatever they offered me, because in 5 years, I'm going to be miles ahead of anybody else my age.
Yeah. Very true. Yeah. And thank you so much. Those are really very great points, actually, for any newcomer who is entering into the new field, or the students who are pursuing their education.
Yep.
So thank you so much. And the book that you have mentioned, Everyone's Culture, actually, and that is on my list as well now. And I will encourage audience as well to check that book out. And thank you so much. It's really very overwhelming to listen to you and have somebody who has a great experience on the organizational culture and the leadership. So really appreciate your time. We are moving towards closure of this episode, which is the leadership, and you are no doubt leading your area of interest. So what is your leadership style, and any specific leader that you always follow or admire, and why?
Okay. Well, I'm a huge believer in servant leadership. And frankly, when I started out doing the research and writing of the book, I was not looking at servant leadership. In fact, I was totally agnostic about style. I just was asking the question, how do elite organizations, how do they approach leadership? Other than that, I wasn't looking for anything specific. But along the way, what I found was consistently, and not every organization knew they were doing it, but consistently I found organizations that intentionally practiced some form of servant leadership. Some called it that specifically, and some didn't, but that's what they were doing. Real quick story. I'm having a conversation with a gentleman by the name of General Barry McCaffrey. He's a retired 4-star general out of the United States Army, 32-year veteran. When he retired from the Army, he went on to serve as a cabinet position in the Clinton administration. There's not, if he doesn't know something about leadership, it's not worth knowing. When he retired, he was considered one of the most highly decorated generals to have ever worn the uniform of a United States Army general. When I asked him how the Army approaches the practice of leadership, he immediately said, without equivocation, he said, we practice servant leadership. The next word that he said blew me away. In fact, I didn't even realize what he was saying until about 10 minutes after I talked to him. I'm reading the transcript. And he says, after he talks to me about servant leadership, his next word is love. And his experience of being loved by a senior commander when he was just a lowly 1-star general. and that effect on him and his ability to lead his troops, which at that time was the 24th Infantry Mechanized Division, just a little company of 26,000 soldiers.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
And so I no longer believe in the value of leadership style. In fact, when someone says, oh, well, my leadership style is this, that, or the other thing, I actually get kind of angry.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you lead based on your style and I lead based on my style, that means we're leading based on our own personal values.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Organizational values are secondary.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
High performing organization says, here's our values and here's how we are going to lead. Mm-hmm. The Army says, you will lead based on the principle of servant leadership. It's not a style. It is a requirement. Mm-hmm. And they have, in fact, when I asked the general, I said, so how does the Army reinforce and teach servant leadership? He says, well, I'll give you this one's real, actually gave me three, but one of the ways they do it. And if you ever see a movie about the Army and combat and military movies, you'll see this, not just a movie thing. The highest ranking officer is the last one to get on a helicopter as it's going out on a mission. The first person to get off that helicopter is the highest ranking officer. They are putting themselves in harm's way first. If they're landing that helicopter in a hot, battle zone, the highest ranking officer is putting himself or herself in harm's way first, because their job, based on the values of the Army, is selfless service, which they define as putting the welfare of the nation, the Army, and your subordinates above your own welfare.
Yeah.
What would happen in our organizations, technology firms, legal firms, healthcare organization, manufacturing, et cetera, if every leader and manager was trained to put the welfare of customers, the organization, and their subordinates above their own welfare, we would revolutionize organizational life.
Wow. Yeah, that's very well said. And thank you so much. The way you mentioned the servant leadership style, I guess some of the guests, actually, I can say most of the guests who appeared on the show as well, they mentioned about the servant leadership. So I can see the importance of serving for others, like standing for a motto, being a leader, that's serving for people under me. So that is the kind of a need we need. That is kind of a need of a culture, right? That we need more and more, that people please consider every single person below them. So thank you so much for sharing this. And it was great listening to you, as well as you have such a great experience in this particular era. So really very appreciate all your time and consideration.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm honored to be with you.
To share your experiences as well as your short stories. I loved those. So thank you so much, and bye for now.
Okay, bye-bye.
All right, so that is all about Dan Edds and the way he is leading his passion. As he mentioned, passion found him, and I can see that from his short stories and such a great experience that he has in the organizational culture and leadership. Before we close this episode, I'm going to read a closure quote from Bill Taylor, which says, "The true mark of a leader is the willingness to stick with a bold course of action, an unconventional business strategy, a unique product development roadmap, a controversial marketing campaign, even as the rest of the world wonders why you are not matching in step with the status quo." In other words, real leaders are happy to zig while others zag. They understand that in an era of hyper competition and non-stop disruption, The only way to stand out from the crowd is to stand for something special. So on that quote, we are closing today's episode. See you guys in the next episode. Until we meet, happy leading. Let's lead together. Stay safe. Bye for now.